Dear colleagues, we will be just giving 1 minute for settling down, and then we will start with our regular 90 seconds video, and then we will proceed with the agenda. Thanks for your interest, and see you soon. But so we can start with the video if you like. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second monthly webinar for local governments and municipal authorities constituency in the year 2022, convened by ICLEI, Local Government for Sustainability. My name is Yunus Arikan. I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI, and I'm also the focal point of the LGMA constituency to the UNFCCC. It's my great pleasure to take you through to the webinars to the webinar today. A couple of housekeeping rules. This webinar is recorded, and then the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel. During the webinar, we recommend to take the time to go through the presentations, and then reserve time for Q&A or debate and interventions from the participants afterwards, so that we can cover all the topics smoothly. But during the sessions, during the presentation, if there are any points, you can easily type in your comments in the chat box, on the Q&A box, so that we can cover them later on. Today, we would like to inform you that we will follow a bit different modality for this webinar. The same we have applied for the morning session at 10 a.m. in German time this morning. So the logic is that we are having this every third Wednesday for a 1 hour duration, focusing particularly on the UN climate change processes. However, you may be aware that there is a growing convergence in terms of both the themes and also processes to discuss nature and climate issues together. And similar to the role that ICLEI is playing in the climate process, ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center, together with many other partners, they're also playing the same role in the biodiversity negotiations. And due to this overlap, this year we thought it may be good to have a joint discussion so that we hear similarities or differentiations between the two processes, and also discuss other relevant processes, so that it is going beyond COP27 but a bit more extended. So in that regard, in order to enable an ample time for Q&A and all the discussions, we are planning that this session could be going beyond the regular 1 hour, and according to the needs, we could extend up to 30 minutes more. And in that sense, I'd like to thank particularly for my colleague Ingrid Kotze from Cities by the Center, who is also leading our negotiations on behalf of our constituency in the CBD process. She will be joining us in this webinar. As I said, we have tested the same thing in the morning. So if you believe that will prove any benefit, we could consider to continue this practice in the coming months. In that regard, this webinar schedule and links were also communicated to the colleagues who are following the CBD biodiversity advocacy agenda of subnational governments. So we also would like to warmly welcome them if they are here with us. So with that, let's say a minor update, let me go through the agenda for today. Let's again have a basics of our background on our climate process and COP26 outcomes. We would like to today particularly spend some time in the G7 2022 German presidency, because there are really significant outcomes, or there are significant initiatives that's coming from this process, which is almost unprecedented, and it's many cases it's the first of its kind, and we believe this will provide a huge contribution to our climate advocacy as well. And then we will spend more time on the COP27 process. Once we have a break for a brief Q&A, we will continue with Ingrid, and I think it could also be better once she concludes, we can have a bigger debate. Actually, this is what we had achieved, we had followed this morning. So after listening to Ingrid, we had also a lot of inputs and even some clarification points, and it was really interesting to see how things are held in slightly in their own uniqueness, but how we can benefit from those processes. So that I think this was really a helpful exercise. So let's kick off without further ado. For those who are new, we are the constituency that is following the UNFCCC process since '95. This means the first COP. We are one of the 3 constituencies in this regard. We are the networks of local and regional governments. And since 2013, we're also serving or representing the Global Task Force of Local Energy Governments, which is a process that is aiming to influence the UN processes through subnational action and advocacy. Because of the procedures, there are a limited number, nowadays more than 30 networks accredited to UNFCCC. So LGMA officially brings together those institutions or organizations, but especially in the preparations, in consultations, mailings, and webinars, or planning of our interventions, we are working with a broader diversity of partners who do not necessarily have to go through the process, so that we can be inclusive and we could be diverse in our positions. What we are basically doing, we are providing inputs to the process through our submissions. We participate year-round in the consultations, especially at COPs, which is end of year. We also convene side events. We also manage our delegation accredited through our partners and then the international delegations. If appropriate, we convene leaders summit of cities and regions, side events, and as we have seen in the COP, but we have also tested similar experiences in Copenhagen and onwards. We convene multi-level action pavilions or cities and regions pavilions. And I think based on the success in Glasgow, it's very likely that we will continue this practice to have a home for subnationals in the Blue Zone, hopefully in the coming COPs as well. As a brief overview, I mean, we have seen that these efforts have particularly advanced since 2007, when there was a hope that there will be a new UN agreement in Copenhagen. After the failure, we continued, we didn't give up, and this gave us the chance that we could influence the Paris Agreement, where we are recognized at all levels of governments in the UN process, UNFCCC process. And since then, we are implementing the Paris Agreement as our responsibility, also our homework as in this part of this process. The video that you have seen in the morning at the beginning was a brief overview of our story between Paris Agreement implementation after 5 years anniversary. We are now working on a new video that will capture our important moments in Glasgow, because Glasgow opened the second phase of the Paris Agreement. For the time being, we would still like to enjoy the 5+ of Paris anniversary. And all of these are available in our YouTube channels, as well as recordings of our previous webinars. And overall, we are keeping citiesandregions.org as our landing zone on the websites, on the internet, for our data, reports, and analysis on COP26 or overall climate processes. So we are making this process annually, but last year it was 2 years. Therefore, we had a bit more extended, intense communication and efforts. Now we are aware the COP27 is just 10 months ahead. Obviously, the number of webinars will be less, but we will continue to keep this regular. Therefore, we have already scheduled our monthly webinars every third Wednesday, as long as there's no big overlap. And you're more than welcome to join us as well in the rest of these calendar. Just to recap, when we were preparing for Glasgow, we were saying that the success of COP26 depends on work at home. In order to make sure Glasgow delivers, we have to make sure the new NDCs should be presented, and this should be more ambitious. The good news is that there are several countries who have raised their ambition compared to 2015, in particular working with their local and regional governments. And the second good news is that this is a diversity from global north to global south. And this was one of our biggest, let's say, assets. When we were going towards Glasgow, we were saying that it's time for multi-level action, so that this practice by several countries should be inspirational to other nations, so that the COP26 outcomes should embrace multi-level action as a building block of the new phase of the Paris Agreement. We were proud that in the blue zone and the negotiations area, we were able to create a big, let's say, largest tent for subnationals. It was the home of subnationals, cities, towns, and regions, through a diversity of networks across the world. And we were particularly proud and delighted to be hosted by Scottish government and Glasgow and other partners, Wales government, and so many global and national partners in the UK were there as contributing or supporting partners. And we express our appreciation for them. At the beginning of COP26, we said that time for multi-level action has come. We announced our roadmap, which is building on this, how to enshrine the multi-level action as the new normal, and also focus on financing as well as just climate action, and stepping up our engagement in the UNFCCC process. As a result, in this slide, you can see we have received we have even exceeded our expectations in many senses in terms of our outcomes from Glasgow. In basic terms, first of all, there is a Glasgow Climate Pact, which is in fact two identical, very similar documents, but some differentiations in the under UNFCCC, under Kyoto Protocol, and under Paris Agreement. The text on the Kyoto Protocol is very small, just 1 page, but UNFCCC and Paris Agreement are, one is 70, one is 90 paragraph long, but a lot of paragraphs are the same. Here in this decision, a COP decision, we have now in the preamble paragraph, we have a reference which says the parties are highlighting the urgent need for multi-level and cooperative action. The phrase multi-level was a result of an impressive mobilization of advocacy efforts of all the local and regional government networks in Glasgow, in the Blue Zone, but also across the world, because there was a very nice collaboration on the virtual platforms as well. And there is a number of references to local and regional governments. Constituencies are for the first time recognized. There is a welcoming of the Marrakesh Partnership, which we as ICLEI and many partners have also endorsed. We are very excited with this decision 64, paragraph 64, on the engaging youth in the local decision making, because we have been practicing this on the climate emergency declarations already. So it's great that we can now build upon this legitimate, let's say, COP decision. And finally, it has to be recognized that the Glasgow Climate Pact is encouraging or inviting nations to bring a new NDC by the end of this year, which is COP27. This is a bit unique because NDCs are expected to be prepared in every 5 years, but because the overall ambition is still low, there was a special decision that a new NDC is expected. And for us, one of the biggest reasons for this new NDCs is that all the announcements that came up throughout the 12 days in Copenhagen, many initiatives, and many of the initiatives like Race to Zero, Race to Resilience, unfortunately, almost none of them are existing in the NDCs. It's normal because many NDCs were presented before the COP. So we hope with this NDCs, the new NDCs, all these announcements during the year and during COP could be now fed into the official national plans. And this is the only way we can make sure the transparency and accountability of these commitments. Otherwise, they will be just left as nice statements, but nothing to follow up. So a revised NDC for every nation is particularly important, especially to make sure our multi-level collaboration is also appropriately now reflected into the new NDCs as the new normal. On the finance front, we particularly paid attention on the 6.8, the non-market approaches. There is a new process starting. They have not completed the definitions, and our goal is to make sure sustainable integrated urban and territorial development is one of the non-market approaches. And this will be particularly very important for developing countries who are expecting a huge potential or volume of urbanization. And this mechanism could help them finance their urbanization in a more climate friendly, but also in more financially convenient way as well. So throughout this year, we will provide our inputs. We are particularly happy. Local and subnational context is already recommended to be taken into account in the preparation of this non-market approach. So it's already a good starting point. One of the many outcomes, but very particularly relevant for LGMA, is the action for climate empowerment. There is this references on, this is the coverage of education, training, public participation, awareness, and international cooperation and public access to information, which has numerous paragraphs on local and regional governments. This gives us a huge opportunity to connect our work on the ground to the UNFCCC process, because action for climate empowerment, the elements of action are very soft, but it is very powerful, impactful to make a change in the mindset of many of the decision makers and the stakeholders. In addition to those official outcomes, we have made numerous announcements, initiatives on finance. We have made interventions. More than 400 representatives were there despite the COVID restrictions. From food to biodiversity, we had new initiatives which were announced outside or inside the blue zone. We are very excited about Scotland and Wallonia for the reference to loss and damage. US, Japan, US, China have made several announcements, and several initiatives and reports are also prepared by GCOM and many other partners as well. Yes, that was what we left in Glasgow. And over the past couple of weeks, an important thing has happened. G7 German presidency for the first time recognized and in particularly provided a huge recognition to cities and urbanization in their program. It's the first time the developed countries will discuss cities and urbanization in this context. You see in this slide, we have copied all the references, but we don't have to go through it now. But the essence is that it is almost embedded in the whole across the agenda. This is important because for years and years, developing countries have always been expecting the leadership of developed countries, and G7 is one of the most important mechanisms. So if G7 is aiming to address cities and subnations and urbanization, this can provide huge impetus to G20, to UN process, so that we can build the dialogue and we can connect the dots so that we can present more impactful input to the COPs at the end of the year. We are very excited that this will be an interesting agenda. As we said, This will be unique. If you look at the countries involved in G7, almost all of them have some important relevance to this process. For example, Canada is a country where on the NDCs, they already have a special annex of the climate action of provinces. And urbanization is in their province's authority. We have key figures like Jean Lemire, our colleague from Quebec government, who is both in the Canadian delegation, but in the Quebec delegation as well. Canada is the government who have tabled the famous preamble paragraph on the Paris Agreement. So Canada is one of the strongest allies for us. US, obviously, we have a strong NDC in the Biden administration, which starts by saying that US was able to elevate its ambition because cities and states did not step back while the US federal government was out of Paris Agreement. So that is already a fantastic vision, and they already have been announcing collaboration with US-Japan and US-China agreements. And John Kerry is a strong ally of subnationals. And in the US, there's a Secretary of Housing, which is also similar to the Ministers of Housing or Urbanization. In France, we have a special ministry for territorial cohesion and relation with local governments. France is this year's first half EU presidency. Therefore, their leadership together with Germany will, of course, be very, very impactful, we hope. Obviously, Paris Agreement is always a legacy of the French government, but you may have heard in the first couple of months of the year, there will be a very interesting domestic agenda because there is a presidential election. So it may be a bit challenging for our French partners to navigate all these complex agendas, EU presidency, climate, and the presidential election. So we wish them the best, but we will be counting on France in this process. Japan, you may have heard, there is already decentralization is one of the core topics of Japan. Decarbonization domino effect was a term that they coined in 2020 and 21. Redesign platform they have offered to the UNFCCC. In 2016, G7 Japan presidency hosted the first ever Environment Ministers and Mayors Forum. Therefore, we are particularly looking forward to leadership of Japan. There is a Minister of Internal Affairs that will be very likely the counterpart for the urbanization debate, and Japan will be the next G7 president. So therefore, it is important that Japan is part of this process. Italy, of course, last year with G20 presidency, they have offered huge support. There is a new G20 working group on intermediary cities, and there are numerous ministries within the current government, including Minister of Sustainable Infrastructure, which speaks to the heart of local governments. Germany, of course, we are now watching carefully and hopefully engage more actively. There's a new Ministry of Urbanization. Jennifer Morgan is the new climate envoy in Germany, which is a long-time activist, and that is also very encouraging that this multi-level and multilateral perspective could now feed into the highest levels of governments. We have to recall, we have a current chancellor of Germany as a former mayor or former governor of Hamburg, which we hope will provide additional support, and as you can see, that even has paid off in the current document. European Union has always been a partner with Covenant of Mayors for so long. Inside EU, there is a DG Regio, and Vice President of EU, Mr. Timmermans, is also the co-chair of GCOM. So EU is also a close partner. And finally, UK, they are already having a minister. They have a Ministry of Local Governments. Definitely, we hope they will carry the COP26 legacy. Again, Boris Johnson is the former mayor of London, and we have particularly seen this during COP26 negotiations when we addressed him that he has the responsibility to support his fellow mayors from his previous career. He was really nodding his head, and I think this was also one of the powerful moments where we have finally reached to this targets, so this text into the Glasgow Climate Pact. Obviously, UK is now proud because core cities have kicked off the Urban 7 as the legacy from the UK presidency, and UK is also particularly supporting the Edinburgh process in the biodiversity space. Finally, now we have the ministerial schedule. Obviously, May is a very peak moment. There will be so many ministerials. In June, there is also a number of other ministerials, but the Heads of State Summit. And in September, we will have the sustainable urban development. You see, in all these ministerials, there are some others, but these are the ones that are most directly relevant for our work. We hope to engage in this process, and it's our great happiness that in a couple of days' time, we're expecting the German Association of Cities to make a special announcement on how they will lead the Urban 7 process, which kicked off last year in the UK during the UK presidency by Core Cities UK. And in fact, in 2016, we had the first Environment Ministers and Mayors Forum. In 2017 at COP, we made a commitment that cities and regions will contribute in G20 and G7 agendas. Immediately afterwards, we had the Urban 20, and now 4 years later or 5 years later, Urban 7 is coming into the game. So this shows that we are building brick by brick our advocacy space. And in that sense, this is a fantastic example of commitment, but dedication and continuity of our efforts, and making sure that our institutional progress is always taken care of with our members and partners. Let's focus on Egypt. So we have this annual process now. It is in the hands of the UK government as the presidency of COP, but the Egyptian government is also starting to prepare their let's say, or finalizing their preparations. They have already announced their Minister of Foreign Affairs as the president designate. We will see for the first time a new title, Ministerial Coordinator and Climate Special Envoy, who will be which will be led by Environment Minister of Egypt, Ms. Yasmin Fuad. She is a very seasoned, experienced negotiator, both in the climate space as well as in the biodiversity COP, where she was the president in 2018. We're still waiting for the Egyptian government to nominate their high-level climate action champion, who will be working hand in hand with Nigel Topping from the UK. And in fact, we heard that the Egyptian presidency team, incoming presidency team, is already now, currently in these hours and these days, they are in Bonn. They are talking to the Secretariat, and we can expect anytime a new announcement may come soon. Meanwhile, we're already in touch with the presidency team, especially through the governorate of South Sinai, where we worked on the biodiversity COP, but as well as Minister of Environment as well, so that at least we have the first interactions built, the first relations being built. One thing important, obviously, while Egypt is getting up to speed, it's good that COP26 presidency is still continuing their leadership. They are not giving up. Obviously, their delegation is much less shrinked in terms of its size, but we are happy to see still engagement team is still following the process. They have already created continuity to the initiatives like councils that they have created. For us, one of the most important agenda point will be the way we will engage with the Friends of COP, which is directly reporting to Alok Sharma, or working with Alok Sharma as the COP26 president. In last year, it was Mr. Eric Garcetti, mayor of Los Angeles and chair of C40. We know Mayor Garcetti is now assigned as the US ambassador to India. He may still be staying in as a friend of COP. I mean, Alok Sharma, COP president, can still keep this, but we hope the seat reserved for local and regional governments, and maybe more than one seat, could still be filled by an active political leader who has a mandate in his jurisdiction and within our networks. Last week, when we had the first call with the UK presidency, they said that Alok Sharma will be having a call with Sadiq Khan, mayor of London and C40 chair, in a couple of days, sometime soon. We hope to have some updates from this dialogues. And as I said, we would even wish to see more seats reserved for local and regional governments. So that will be one of the priorities in the coming days and weeks. After our webinar in January, a week after, there was a statement from Alok Sharma, which paved the priorities of COP26 presidency in the 2022. I have particularly underlined the phrase delivering on the Glasgow Climate Pact because it is exactly the motto, or our motto as LGMA, that we have been developing over the past couple of months since Copenhagen, since Glasgow. It is almost fully complying or fully responding to this expectation, our motto is multi-level action delivers. So we are very happy that there is a synonymity between these two processes. The thing that we were a bit disappointed was that in this speech and in the speech that was actually delivered at the Chatham House, we did not see any reference to cities, or we did not see any reference to multi-level action. We still believe we may see more statements that will support this legacy from COP26, but that's the reason why we're engaged in the presidency's efforts, so that we can convey this message to the team so that they can take this into account. Let's go to our priorities. So we will be going towards a multi-level action delivers mode of action. This will be based on 4 main blocks: enhanced multi-level indices. All our commitments, all our initiatives should be now finding their ways into indices. We have to expand the term of multi-level collaboration to other governmental bodies, like legislative bodies, councils, parliaments, senates, at the subnational level as well. And you can connect to judicial stakeholders. We want to make sure that Friends of Multi-Level Action is much more operable. And for biggest topic will be to focus on the unfinished business on climate emergency. Let's remember, COP was important. It kicked off the second phase of the Paris Agreement. It could have failed. Therefore, it is a huge progress, but it was not the leapfrog that we were expecting from Glasgow. So we have a number of agendas that we would like to see to be discussed. And the good news is that both Egypt and the African delegations are putting a serious emphasis into these topics. And if you look at these are most of the soft topics. And in fact, any changes in these agendas, be it food, be it circularity, be it waste and consumption, if we make changes there, the root cause of climate change, which is our lifestyle, our way of relation with the nature and ourselves, will be significantly changed for the good. And this will already result in huge reductions in emissions and preparedness for climate disasters. Therefore, we believe addressing these core issues through multi-level action will be a core element to drive the world to a climate emergency mode. We will be very closely following migration, loss and damage agenda, and we would like to even consider a unique dialogue with the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which are the countries who are particularly vulnerable to the climate impacts and loss and damage issues. As we said, since the beginning of the year, we are speaking, and even last year, we were asking for a climate and urbanization ministerial. This didn't come through in Glasgow, but we are much more positive and hopeful about this to happen this year because of the reference to G7, which could feed into G20, but also the UN Secretary General's initiative, so that there's a huge dynamism now in the UN space, so that a climate and urbanization ministerial could be really giving us a huge opportunity if we can convince, or if the COP presidency is also convinced into this idea. And obviously, we will empower our members in Africa, as well as Mediterranean, Middle East, and North Africa. This is not the first time COP is coming to Africa. We had seen this in Nairobi, in Marrakesh, but it is the first time it is coming to the region where Arabic communities or Islamic communities or Middle East communities are so close in terms of their proximity and culture and political relations. So this is an opportunity to empower this region as well as Mediterranean, which is also very unique to Egypt and others as well. So overall, our expectation is that yes, we have to change gears in Sharm el-Sheikh onwards. And the logic is that if we say that second phase of the Paris Agreement has started, we can make an analogy. You may be watching all these Netflix movies or series. You have a second episode, and then you have a second season. For us, Glasgow was the second episode on climate action. But we have to open a second season for climate emergency in Sharm el-Sheikh. And multi-level action delivers could play a huge role to make this a reality. Let's remember, UNFCCC already has a number of opportunities. For example, the reference to food in the preamble, in the Article 2 of UNFCCC, which was there since '92. It's interesting to note that there is no one single program on food dedicated to food. Yes, we have the discussion on agriculture, but nothing on food specifically. So we want to emphasize it. And the good news, Egyptian Minister Fouad already mentioned this. She wants to have a food day in Sharm el-Sheikh. The good thing again, Marrakesh Partnership, human settlements, thematic pathway, waste and consumption is an excellent gateway or segue to discuss food consumption, food production, food waste, even in our discussion. So we have a number of elements that we have not utilized before, but we can bring to the table. Obviously, Paris Agreement and Glasgow Climate Pact preamble paragraph is also our biggest legitimacy as well. So let's remember, we are still discussing now in the governance model of LGMA. We have to change our gears in the sense that we have to be much professional responding to those new agendas that every UN process is asking input from us. So we have to respond to them. We have to give voices for our regional groups, thematically working, be skilled, more professional, and we have to be creating our regular COP working groups. The good thing is that now UNFCCC has started the phases for in submissions. The first deadline is already over. It was yesterday, but we know it's always possible to submit sometimes, or there are sometimes flexibilities that late submissions are also accepted. There is a number of other agendas on the 28th of February, and in early March and until March, we have so many agendas. These are really very relevant for our constituency and our partners. And we have already seen interest from our partners like Regions 4 on adaptation, UN Capital Development Fund on Article 6.8. For example, we can approach the GCOM because of the Innovate for Cities and IPCC agenda. For loss and damage, we would look forward to Scotland because they will continue to build on what they have been carrying out as a legacy of Glasgow, that they have donated a grant for loss and damage facility. So in the next couple of days, we would be approaching to all of you once again to map who could lead us. And since this is at the beginning of the year, the submissions do not have to be lengthy. Even 1 page is enough. And we would like to use this opportunity once again to frame our working groups. In that sense, we have to be gathering our delegations in main bodies, in main processes. First of all, in terms of thematic working groups, we have to follow the bodies of the UNFCCC. Then we have processes, and then we have the global climate action, which is a combination of races, thematic pathways, and regional climate weeks. We could envisage specific country groupings according to continental or development levels. And with the COP working group, we could work on our relation with the host country, presidency, but also host city and host region as well. Here is an example how we have given the ownership and visibility for all our partners who delivered LGMA statements in COP. So those partners who will draft our positions and lead in this process, we could consider similar visualization so that they can proudly say that, yes, this is the family of LGMA, but it was us who paid attention. We mobilized our capacity voluntarily, and here is our results on behalf of all of us. So we would be happy to follow that logic into the thematic working groups, into the regional working groups, and also COP27 working group as well. There's not too much change on the COP27 working group because as we said, the Egyptian delegation is just having discussions, and we believe it may be better that we follow up with this next week. We have already started a discussion with Minister of Environment, but I think we will be able to follow up next week so that this will be much more informed in terms of how to go forward, so that we are not misguiding ourselves, and to the best available information, we can start planning ourselves. I will stop here because that's a chronology, but I want to focus this section, particularly after listening to Ingrid, because the topics she will cover will also be very close to our discussions. And in that sense, maybe I now give a break. I know it may not be so easy for all of you to pay attention to this long and intense updates, but I see some already chat box already receiving some inputs from your side. So let us give some time for us to hear all these inputs. Heloise from Regions 4. Heloise, you want to read your statement yourself, or you can turn on your mic if you like. If not, I mean, let me go through the, Heloise is mentioning about whether ICLEI will focus on a few countries to make sure the reviewed NDCs is aligned to Race to Zero and Race to Resilience commitments. I think the opposite would be more appropriate, to align Race to Zero and Race to Resilience commitments to the NDCs. But yes, and this will not be limited to few countries. We want to work on this with all countries, because that is a mandate from Glasgow, and we have to push for this. Therefore, our engagement in the next couple of weeks and months, it will be important. And let me also underline that next week we'll also have the discussion at the Global Task Force. So we will also have their engagement. So definitely this should be our priority, and more than happy how to work together. Adaptation goal, as you may have seen, Alois, I particularly mentioned you as potential co-lead of LGMA on the global goal on adaptation. Yes, the deadline is yesterday, but I assume if we make a submission by the end of this month, this should still be acceptable, because this is a bit soft deadline. There is not an immediate report as far as I know. David from UN Capital Development Fund, he says that he's leaving soon, and he says that they will provide inputs, and for sure we have mentioned that we already had a good bilateral discussion with David as UN Capital Development Fund. They are committed to lead our work on Article 6.8, and we will have to follow up, because for that one we are not over the deadline yet. So we'll look forward to working with David as such. And once again, anyone who wants to contribute in this debate verbally, I see Felix. Sorry, Felix, I missed your message. It was at one of the beginnings. Missing UNEA 5. You will hear more from Ingrid, because you know UNEA 5 is focusing on nature this year, and we have already a lot of engagement there. So let's give a time for Ingrid to finish her presentation, and then let's follow up onwards. But your points are, of course, plastics, and you will definitely hear more from Ingrid in her speech. Let's wait for her. And I think we have covered. So good. So I suggest, since we covered all the inputs, let's give time for now Ingrid to listen from her updates from the biodiversity negotiations, and then we'll come back. So we will continue with the dialogue. You can raise your hand and we can turn on your microphone. And Veronica from CC35, thanks for your support, that you also have seen your input as well. So we will continue to stay in close collaboration with you. Ingrid, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just need to be able to share my screen. There you are. There's my presentation, and I hope everybody can see it. Great. Thank you. And as Eunice said, this is really very strategic that we're bringing the biodiversity agenda into this LGMA space, particularly because of what came out of COP27 in Glasgow last year, but also because from the CBD, the Biodiversity Convention side, there's a very strong drive to forge closer links with not just the Climate Convention, but also the one on combat desertification. So it certainly is, I think, an important way to approach it from our major group side. What I wanted to do today, I think, is just to bring everybody up to speed on what's happening in the biodiversity space. There's a lot of things that have happened the past 2 years. As you know, it should all have already culminated in a new agreement in 2020, which hasn't happened. So over the past 18 months, 2 years, what the CBD has done has to try and maintain the momentum, and had a series of informal and formal online meetings of its subsidiary bodies. There are two, the Scientific, Technical and Technological Advice one, which is called SAPSTA, as well as the one on implementation, which is called SBI. And then the intersessional body that was set up in 2018 at the previous COP to work specifically on the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is called the Open-Ended Working Group, or OEGWG. That's also been continuing its work in terms of developing new drafts. And the agreement with the parties has been that the discussions can continue, and there is the review of documentation, there's statements made, inputs made, comments made, but not any formal negotiation. So what we do, things are put into brackets, square, round, all kinds of brackets, underlined, etc. But the agreement was that before the next COP was held, there would be an in-person resumed session of all three of these bodies. And that's going to be taking place now in Geneva over the course of 3 weeks. And it's really a very intense time, because normally this would be there would be a block of 2 weeks for the subsidiary bodies, and then another block of around about 2 weeks also for the open-ended working group. But we've had to condense this into a single 3-week, just under 3-week period. So the modalities of this meeting is going to be that it will be, as I said, in person, but with limited capacity. They've had to reduce the number of delegates from parties to 6 maximum, and to observers even less than that too. There will be virtual opportunity, which is unlimited, and it is intended as an interactive session. There will be speaking opportunities in both the plenary sessions as well as the contact groups, but that is limited this time just to the in-person delegates. It's not for the online virtual delegates. We have also been warned by the SCBD and the Bureau that if the COVID situation worsens in Geneva by the time the meeting comes up, they may limit the numbers on the day in the actual venue of in-person people. And then, as I said, the people that are, the delegates that are registered as online or virtual viewers, they can watch all the proceedings, but they are not able to actually make any interventions or participate in the negotiations. With one exception is that if there are state parties that for reasons of travel restrictions, COVID, are not able to travel physically to Geneva, they can make representations and a special request to the Secretariat, and they will then be allowed to engage as a state party virtually. So the organization of work, as I said, is extremely tight. There are numerous meetings, and we're going to have morning, afternoon, evening sessions on weekends. It starts off with a joint plenary of all 3 bodies, and they will allow opening statements to be made in respect of all 3 of those bodies, by parties by regional groups and major stakeholders. And fortunately, the local government is recognized as a major group. However, they are not making provision for statements by parties and observers at that stage. What happens then is, once the plenary is over, each of those 3 meetings, the SAPSTA one, the SBI, the working group one, they will meet separately, sort out their organization of work. They will deal with their conference room papers, the limited documents, etc. They'll set up the contact groups. There's ample time provided for contact groups. The final detail of the schedule for contact groups will obviously depend on progress in the plenary sessions of those various meetings. In some cases, there were already contact groups established at the last sessions towards the end of last year, which were the virtual informal sessions, formal sessions, but they will be continuing. But there are obviously other agenda items which at that stage looked like they didn't need any contact groups, but may now actually end up in a contact group. The organization of the contact groups is going to be very tricky, because they have committed to, although these things will be held concurrently, they have committed to where an agenda item, let's say on capacity building, or if it deals with something like resource mobilization, and it's dealt with both in the technical group and the implementation group. They will not have those contact groups at the same time. They'll try and make sure that the same sort of agenda items don't clash. And then they will obviously be considering conference room papers in the normal way, and the idea is to come out with the limited documents, the L documents, because those are the things that we need to go into the COP. Then just on the COP, before I carry on with this particular slide, the final date of the COP has not been made public yet. I understand that there has been a meeting very recently where some agreement has been raised around dates. It's important to know that the Geneva meetings end at the end of March, and there needs to be at least a 3-month period between the end of the last negotiation meetings and the COP meeting, they promise us that a notification is imminent. They are preparing the notification, so we should have that within the next week or so, or 2 weeks. But to get back to Geneva, one of the important things that we will be watching at Geneva and participating in is what we call Conference Room Paper 8. This is something that comes out of the Edinburgh process, which, as many of you may know, ICLEI was one of the Edinburgh process partners. It was hosted by the Government of Scotland, and there were a number of subnational governments participating in it, also a number of other network organizations such as Regions 4. And the big thing that came out of that was the declaration, and the declaration called for a renewed decision on engagement with subnational governments, and included in this a more ambitious plan of action. Now, this is, I say renewed, because there was the same sort of decision taken in Nagoya in 2010, and ICLEI at that stage was also very involved in it. In fact, ICLEI has been active in this space of the CBD for more than a decade, driving, advocating for the voice of local governments and making sure that there's been a succession of important decisions around role of local governments. So this one is really important because it's taking us into the next decade, and there's a number of key changes in terms of comparing it to the previous one. And the most important of that relates to the fact that there's a real recognition that local and subnational governments can play an important role in preparing and planning these sort of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. These are the equivalent of the NDCs, but also in implementing of the global biodiversity framework, and then very specifically from the point of view of being able to contribute to meeting of targets and achieving milestones and those sorts of things. I think something else that comes out there is we're learning about how to improve coordination and exchange of lessons, looking at things, mechanisms and tools where one can build the capacity of local authorities, bringing the various agendas, the climate agenda, the health agenda. One Health is a big thing in the global biodiversity framework. Also the whole issue of ecosystem restoration, which touches on land degradation. And then I think then just finally also to mention that there is a provision under one of the action areas for monitoring and reporting. We've learned from the past that we didn't fare very well in terms of monitoring our performance against the Aichi biodiversity targets. There's a real strong feeling about not repeating those mistakes of the past. And so the whole emphasis on the monitoring framework within the global biodiversity framework is picked up in the plan of action for engaging subnational governments. And included in that is a provision, although subnational governments are not required to make commitments, they are encouraged to take voluntary action to support the implementation and the achievement of global and national targets. And included in that is the provision that their national governments should encourage them to share their commitments, to monitor progress against these, and to report on them on the Cities with Nature and Regions with Nature platform. And this is something that ICLEI, together with its other partners, has been developing, and we will be talking about this more going forward, because this is a really important way in which one can really get a good picture of what's happening at the local level and how this contributes also to achieving national and global targets. So just briefly, why is this conference room paper so important? I think the big thing is that, as I said, it's not a new thing. It's something that has been in place since 2010. It's come to the end of its era at the end of 2020. We need a renewed one, a lot more ambitious. And it is, through the mechanism of the plan of action, the CBD is the only of the 3 Rio conventions that has a very systematic and comprehensive mechanism for multi-level governance. They talk about whole of government in terms of the CBD speak, but the principle is the same. I think the other thing is that, as I said now, it's support for and recognition by the parties that this is a way in which they can tangibly and much easily reach their targets. It's important to recognize and to understand also that the co-chairs of the open-ended working group have made it clear that while these policies and the frameworks agreed and the goals and targets are agreed at the national and global levels, the implementation, the actual work that needs to be done happens at local and landscape level. And without cities, without states, without prefectures, it's going to be really hard to achieve those targets, and that one needs to take this up in terms of the implementation. So, as I said, the new global biodiversity framework, you can see there the picture on the left. It has clear vision, mission, all of those sorts of things. It's divided into specific targets and goals. We're working towards a 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, and it's hopefully going to be adopted now at CBD COP27 Part 2. And there are numerous references in there to subnational governments and multi-level governance, not enough to our opinion. The one, as I mentioned, is the whole of government approach. We're wanting to push it stronger. There are some ambiguities around that. It's not always the way in which they refer to it. It's not always consistent. And we want to make it clear that this is not just horizontal, looking at government horizontally in different sectors, different departments and ministries, but also very much a vertical, a multi-level approach. Implementation, as I said, is really important, and there's a lot of emphasis on that, and we are pushing the agenda that local and subnational governments are completely behind their national parties, but also they are indispensable as far as implementation is concerned. As far as targets, of the 21 targets, there's only one that speaks specifically and directly to cities. It talks to it's target 12, it talks to green and blue spaces. We're pushing from our local government major group perspective for a more widespread recognition of the contribution of our constituency in not just one target, but many more, in fact, most of them. And then the other thing is that, and this is an important one, is that there is a recognition, and it's quite clear that subnational government participation is one of the important enabling conditions for implementation. And the link there is very specific to the Edinburgh Declaration, as I said just now, which links it to the Cities with Nature platform and the Regions with Nature platform, and also the plan of action. And we're really hoping that it will be adopted, not just that there will be a decision to encourage or support or endorse it, but to actually adopt the plan of action. It's important to understand it's not a prescriptive plan of action. It is set as a framework, so each party can still implement it in the way that suits its own sort of legal and constitutional framework, its resources, its capacities, etc. And it's been interesting to see that so far, a lot of the discussion, and we anticipate there's going to be some really very heated discussion in the Geneva meetings, some of the key topics that came out in the previous meetings, but also subsequently, you can see, while there's very strong and broad agreement that the parties are happy with the draft, there are obviously things that they feel can be strengthened or improved. For example, there has been some discussion around the theory of change. They recognize that, they're generally happy with that. Also, a lot of support for linkages, not just with the climate agenda, but specifically also the SDGs and the role that biodiversity conservation and ecosystem restoration can play in helping nations and cities achieve the SDGs. Some of the things that the parties and the major groups and stakeholders have felt are missing relate to the current status and the recognition of the fact that there has been such a great loss and what the gap is and what we need to do. So we're expecting to see a little bit of a shift in terms of how the theory of change is put out. There are some questions raised about implementing timeframes. Some countries feel it's not fast enough. Other countries feel it's too fast or too ambitious. So, I mean, we foresee that there's going to be some really hot debate around that. A lot of discussion around the targets, milestones, indicators, and it's, this is where the different geographic and the sort of geopolitical and biophysical strengths and weaknesses of countries are coming out, and it's really interesting to see some of those discussions and how they will take shape. I don't think it's a case of they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think those targets and the structure of the targets is agreed. It's just the detail, how far do you push the target in terms of, is it 30% or is it 15%? Is there going to be differential targets, etc.? I think something that would be interesting for this particular audience is there's a lot of discussion on nature-based solutions. There was originally, it was referenced in one of the targets, it was taken out at some stage. There's a strong lobby for nature-based solutions within many of the countries in the CBD, particularly the EU, for example. But likewise, there are also some serious concerns and reservations that have been raised by very many other countries, in many cases from Africa, from South America, etc. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that within the CBD, there's a recognized concept and approach around ecosystem-based adaptation. There's a decision that has been adopted around that. And there are concerns that, it's confusing terminologies and confusing approaches, but there are also concerns about the fact that there have been some incidences of nature-based solutions that have not had any benefits for biodiversity or for society as in case, but specifically also has led to the loss of biodiversity. So these are some of the criticisms against the nature-based solutions. And then some of the other themes that have come up and are growing are around nature and health, nature and agriculture, or biodiversity and agriculture, human rights-based approaches, very similar to some of the themes that Eunice mentioned earlier. And before I close, I just want to say a few words about UNEA 5.2 and its many associated meetings. We're heading for UNEA starting now next week. The overall theme, as you will know, is strengthening actions for nature to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But it does touch on a wider range of things. It's not just nature, but there is a very strong nature focus. So last week, there was an online Global Major Group and Stakeholders Forum meeting that was held, mostly to prepare and to get, sort of consolidate positions, or where we couldn't agree to positions, to agree to disagree, and how we were going to engage within the whole process. And then, as I said, the kickoff is now as of next week. It's first opening with the open-ended committee of permanent representatives. And then there will be the actual UNEA taking place. So the open-ended committee takes place from more or less 21 to 24, 25 of Feb. And then starting on the 28th of February till the 2nd of March is UNEA 5.2. And then also there is going to be a Cities and Regions Summit, UNEA Cities and Regions Summit, which is one of the many events part of this program. That takes place on the 23rd of February. It is an online event. It's scheduled to take place 2 different times of the day. The first part of it starts around about 12:15 Eastern African time, and then it continues a little later. It is an online event. It's a very high level event. It's organized by UNEP. But with input from organizations such as ICLEI, C40, UCLG. It is going to be, there'll be a keynote address by the Executive Director of UN Habitat, also from UNEP, and there are various high-level politicians from ICLEI, C40, UCLG speaking. For example, ICLEI will have the governor of Yucatan, who's the head of our board biodiversity portfolio. In the opening plenary, we have Mayor Valerie Plante. She's ICLEI's global ambassador for the CBD, and she will be presenting there. Then there are many mayors. There's Mayor of Cape Town, Mayor of London, Freetown, etc. So I have got a link, and I will include the link for you in the chat box, so that you can go and have a look at the program. It also takes you down to where you can register. It's an online event. I would really encourage people to listen into this. And before I end off, I just want to quickly show you on the right hand, I've got a picture of the draft resolutions, the decisions for UNEA 5.2. And there's 5 sort of broad clusters. So the first one, the first cluster, there are 2 draft resolutions that have been put forward on plastic pollution, different aspects of plastic pollution, one specifically on marine plastic pollution. The second cluster is the nature cluster, and there are 4 resolutions, and they're quite different, from sustainable lake management to one from the EU on nature-based solutions. There's also one on animal welfare and environmental sustainability, and then there's one very specifically on biodiversity and health. In the third cluster, there's a series of resolutions around chemicals, waste and pollution, and it includes one from Switzerland. This is the one that I think, was it Felix that asked about, the draft resolution on a science policy, establishing a science policy panel on chemicals, waste and pollution. So that's also one of the resolutions that's in the bundle. And then there's a cluster around sustainable infrastructure, green recovery, as well as circular economy. And then the last cluster is the more sort of, can I say, generic institutional ones. There's one about the GBO, the Global Environment Outlook, as well as on the sort of secretariat for the date and the venue of UNEA 6. And there's one from Russia, which is as yet, I think it has subsequently been submitted. So in a nutshell, that's what the UNEA is about. I think in our next webinar, which is in the 16th of March, if I'm correct, we will have been through UNEA, and we will be able to then give a lot more substantive feedback on some of the final decisions that came out and all of that, what happened. There was an interesting discussion last week in the preparatory meetings, also on nature-based solutions. A lot of concerns raised by several of the stakeholder and some of the major groups. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of UNEA on specifically the nature-based solutions one. And then during the next webinar, we will be in the midst of our Geneva meeting, so we probably will not have quite so much to say about the CBD process, maybe just a bit of an update, but certainly we will focus on the content coming out of UNEA 5.2. Thank you, and let me just take you to my last slide. That's just my links, and then I will stop sharing, and I will put that link to the Cities and Regions Summit at UNEA into your chat box. Thanks.
Thank you, Ingrid, taking us through this really complex and but very, very dynamic process. And we're very happy that our efforts on the advocacy front in the biodiversity has paid off, that we are building on our achievements over the past 10 years. And as you mentioned, among the Rio Conventions, biodiversity is one of the strongest in terms of having such a safe space and mechanisms. And there will be hopefully reflections on this in the UNFCCC. As I said, the drivers of these two processes are a bit different, the modalities are a bit different, but I think one input could be one output to the other could be an input. Maybe the third Rio Convention, desertification COP, will also convene the 15th COP in Abidjan this year in May. However, we have no information about what will be the way of engagement, modalities. It is supposed to be in person and maybe virtual elements, but it is now very, very hard to imagine how we will be planning our participation there. So a couple of questions came up during your points. One came from Jennifer to our panelists. Jennifer was raising the question about how are we as LGMA engaging in the IPCC process. You may know there will be the second working group report released in a couple of days' time. Then later on, working group 3. We as ICLE are accredited to IPCC, but for the past couple of months, we have been rather working with GCOM and Unhabitat on the Innovate for Cities process. It may be good to check with them. There is another process on culture and climate. An IPCC co-sponsored conference was held, which I served in a steering committee, and in fact, it was inspired by the city's IPCC process. So it would be good to check with GCOM colleagues, because I know they are in the process of preparing a summary for urban policymakers as for the AR6. So probably they may have some engagement, and if any other organizations here are on the line who have some updates, they could also share. Heloise was asking about who is leading the process in the UNEP for Cities and Regions Summit. In fact, it is led by the Cities Unit, and we are invited through a number of processes. The Urban Shift project, that is a Jeff7 project, is providing a huge support for this. But ICLE and UCLG was also involved, building on the past year's experience, the first one, let's say. You may recall the first session, the first summit was called Cities Summit, and ICLE was particularly sensitive that this year it should be Cities and Regions Summit. We as ICLE and both UCLG also have a number of subnational governments, regional governments in our membership, and that's why one of the reasons why Governor of Yucatan, which is already leading the Regions with Nature, is now invited to speak at the opening plenary, particularly to represent the voice of cities, building on the Regions with Nature leadership. That is the background on that, and we're happy to connect you further on, Heloise. Eva Banos from CMR is leaving shortly, and I think that was also a feedback we received from the morning presentations as well, that they are welcoming this connection between climate and biodiversity. David also made a very promising feedback to us, David Jackson, and same from Eva Banos. I think these type of feedbacks are helpful for us, so that maybe we can make it much better in future rounds. As Ingrid mentioned, next month we'll be in the middle of these biodiversity negotiations, so it may be less in terms of the substance, but maybe we may have more updates on, for example, desertification or outcomes from UNEA, preparation for Stockholm. In particularly, there is also the discussion about UN Secretary General's task force on future of cities. We are expecting there will be some outcomes soon announced. So it is an opportunity that we could expand the discussion here, so that we could better prepare and make sure the UNFCCC is not isolated. Of course, every process says that they are the center of the earth, but we should be also making everybody know that there are some things going on outside, and sometimes we can learn from each other, but UNFCCC can also help the others. I mean, the scale, for example, the scale of the number of participation, the scale of topics are not comparable to any other outside the UNFCCC space, neither UN Environment Assembly nor biodiversity, in terms of the numbers of accreditations, the number of participation, and the political tensions. But there are a lot of opportunities. UNFCCC can also benefit from the other processes as well. Emily from FMDV, she's also leaving soon, and I think that's very likely to many of our colleagues. She's also expressing her appreciation to our session. So that feedback is also more than welcome. We are able to raise your speakers so that you can intervene. And here's the calendar, actually. Am I not showing my screen? Maybe last couple of minutes, we could think about if there's any additional point. Just a second.
You're on mute.
If not, of course, we can keep our session closed for now. Here is the calendar. You can see, as we said, we will be preparing for a US-Japan Subnationals Forum, Middle East, North Africa Regional Climate Week is taking place at the end of March. Next 2 weeks later, we will be having a big climate conference. In parallel to this, there will be Climate Change Summit in Nantes. In April, we have UNEC Mayors Forum, a big discussion on World Assembly of Local Governments, ICLEI Malmö World Congress, Afro-Cities. The presentation from Ingrid was helpful because in June, UNFCCC has already announced that they will also have a hybrid subsidiary by the sessions, and we have to see what it means. There may be similar procedures that you have explained for the subsidiary of the CBD. August, September, we're expecting the COP in biodiversity. October will be very busy. October, Urban October, as you all know, daring cities will come, but also UCLG World Congress and as well C40 Summit will be happening in October. And then we'll go to Sharm el-Sheikh. In the middle of all these things, we are waiting for announcements from Urban 20, which is led by C40 and UCLG. This time it will be hosted by Jakarta. But as we said, in few days' time, you can expect an announcement from Deutsche Städtetag, the German Association of Cities, on how the Urban 7 process can take shape in 2022, which we hope will be very promising, and we would be very likely be actively involved in this process as well. Shall we declare that we come to the close of the session if there's no more inputs? Okay, I see no objection. And thank you all for your attention and participation. We'll keep you informed, especially let me go back once again to the calendar of submissions, which will be a huge topic that we will share with you our proposals on how to go forward. Thank you very much and take care.